afternoon, everybody. It's Debbie Evans and Rolo here. We're a little bit muddy. We've just come in from a very long walk, so forgive Rolo if he jumps down and starts wiping himself on the carpet. Today we're going to read to you from book 3 in the Secret Adventures of Rolo series, and this is The Dragon's Pram, and I'm jumping into chapter 12, which is all about Rolo and the crown jewels. During the summer months, when the Queen is on holiday at Balmoral, her residence in Scotland, Buckingham Palace opens its doors to paying visitors. You can go in the staterooms, and there is a different exhibition held every year. The Smiley Lady was going up to London to have a tour of the palace and gardens, and she was really looking forward to it. She'd booked it some time in advance, as it's a popular day out, especially with foreign visitors. The floppy-haired boy asked her if she would see the crown jewels on display, and she replied no, because they were kept under lock and key in the Tower of London. "Pussycat, pussycat, where have you been? I've been up to London to visit the Queen," she sang, as she swept me up in her arms. What a stupid rhyme. She went off to catch the coach. Being the summer holidays, the floppy-haired boy was not at school, and he promised his mum he would look after me. However, when his friends called round to see if he wanted to go and play tennis with them, he ushered me out into the garden and told me to do a wee. I saw him pick up his tennis racket and skateboard from the hallway beside the front door, where he still kept it despite being told by the Smiley Lady hundreds of times to keep it in his bedroom or in the garage. Then he shut me in the kitchen with the window open to let some air in. I knew he wouldn't miss me, and anyway, he wasn't a very good timekeeper. The Smiley Lady often joked that he must have been off sick the day they learnt to tell the time at school. As soon as I heard the slam of the front door, I opened the cupboard under the sink and used my terrier escape hatch under the fence to get out of the garden, and I ran down the road just behind the floppy-haired boy. There weren't too many people about because, being the summer holidays, families were already out for the day, enjoying the sunshine. St Peter's Redundant Church in the High Street was already open for morning coffee, but my luck was in because nobody noticed me enter the building. I gingerly approached the outline of myself depicted in the brickwork on the wall behind the grand piano. This was the entrance to the Chilvester Passage. I knew it would take me to an exit behind a cafe sign quite close to Trafalgar Square. As soon as I drew near enough, the lines around the portrait went fuzzy, and I found myself inside the tunnel. Luckily, there was still a torch on the ground where I'd left it from a previous adventure. I was soon standing in the familiar, noisy and bustling street, leaving the passageway behind me sealed, where the Talbot Cafe sign closed behind me with a bang. I'd arrived in London. I made my way round the corner to Trafalgar Square. A quick glance at the fourth plinth, and I was surprised to see it was no longer home to a blue cockerel, but had a model of a skeleton of a horse. No time to find out what that was all about. I knew Buckingham Palace wasn't far away. I ran along Pall Mall, past St James's Palace, round the corner of Green Park. It only took me about 15 minutes to run all the way. I pride myself on being quite fit, as little dogs go. I saw the Smiley Lady pass the ticket booth in the garden, but luckily she didn't see me. I can spot her lime green Mac a mile away. She was talking to someone. I wasn't really surprised. She does that wherever she goes. In a long line of French windows, I saw one that was open, and after a quick glance to make sure I was unobserved, I sneaked inside the palace. I found myself in a library filled with floor-to-ceiling bookcases stuffed full of books, and all around occasional tables and leather armchairs and a big desk, probably for writing very important letters on crested notepaper. A door opened and 2 corgis came bounding into the room. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration because they don't really bound, they waddle. Funny dogs really, but highly favoured by the royal family. I believe the Queen was given one as a little girl and has owned her descendants ever since. The royal dogs were followed by a footman who sat in the important chair behind the desk and spread out the racing post to read. The corgis were oblivious to me at one end of the room, where I was hiding beneath one of those low tables. "Psst," I said, trying to get their attention. They didn't look vicious at all. Perhaps corgis get a bad press. They're supposed to be working dogs, used for herding livestock in Wales, where I too originated from. These two look as if they'd never done a day's work in their lives. One of the corgis let out a little squeak. Let me just show you the picture from the book here. Rolo talking to the corgis. And the footman said, "Be quiet, Myrtle, there's a good girl. I'm checking my horses." The boy dog said in a very posh voice, "I say, what on earth are you?" I looked about, but as I was the only one in range, I presumed he was talking to me. "My name's Rolo, and I'm a time-travelling dog who loves history and nature," I said proudly, by way of introduction. I'm a dog of impeccable manners. Both corgis edged closer, and the one who spoke was clearly impressed. "Really? I say, I've always wanted to time travel. Can I come with you? The name's Knave, by the way." He seemed a bit starstruck, and I was visualising #RoloIsMyHero on social media. I smiled kindly. "Yeah, sure, where do you want to go?" "Now then, Knave, you know we shouldn't talk to strange dogs," whined Myrtle. Knave looked disdainfully at his companion and then turned towards me. "I want to go back to the time when the crown jewels were nearly stolen," he said emphatically. Maybe he thought I could do something about it. "Now, look here, Knave, I'm not sure we can actually influence the outcome of events, but we can certainly observe. I'll have to clear it first with Athelstan." "Who's he, your master?" asked Knave. "Well, not exactly, it's a bit complicated. But if you're serious about coming with me, we better get a move on. Are you sure you can get away from the palace without being missed?" Well, so much for me looking around the staterooms. If this royal corgi wanted adventure, we'd have to exit pretty sharpish. "Myrtle, can you cover for me?" "Well, I don't really think you should." Without further ado, I found myself leading the way through the French door and running across the manicured lawn with the stocky corgi following on behind. The footman didn't even look up from his paper and appeared to be speaking to a bookmaker on the telephone, placing bets for the afternoon races. By the time we got back to Trafalgar Square, Knave was panting quite heavily. I doubted his royal pudginess had ever had so much exercise. He seemed fascinated by the pigeons, but didn't want to chase them. He barked a lot. To be fair, he probably had a bit of a sheltered life. I couldn't begin to imagine what it would be like to be a royal dog. We passed the lamppost where the stolen painting from the National Gallery was once hidden, and crossed the road to the Talbot Cafe. I had to hold up the sign with my paw and revealed to Knave the Chilvester Passage. "Wow," was all he could say. I must admit I hadn't really thought this plan through. It seemed a jolly good idea at the time, having an adventure with a royal dog. There were, however, a few obstacles. For one, where was I going to hide a corgi until night time? And two, what if Athelstan didn't let him into the time tunnel? And the third one occurred to me as I watched him struggle to squeeze through the gap. What if Knave didn't actually fit? Luckily, the journey home was uneventful, save a lot of whining about being hungry. I used my torch and led the way. We left St. Peter's Church unnoticed, and Knave panted all the way up the hill. It was no good. He wouldn't fit through the terrier escape hatch into my garden. This didn't bode well for our time-travelling adventure later. I had to think on my feet, and instead led him to the forest and to the Athelstan tree. The poor corgi was almost on his knees by this point. "Well, well, little pup, who do we have here?" asked Athelstan, emerging from the bark. I introduced Knave, and Athelstan gave a little bow when I explained who he was and what he wanted to do. The tree dragon scratched his head and said, "You'd better leave him here with me and come back a bit later when you can get away from your people." I ran home, squeezing myself under the gate and back through the trapdoor just before the floppy-head boy appeared, out of breath, thirsty, and without too much guilt about having left me at home for a few hours. He gave me a biscuit after a cursory glance to make sure I hadn't weed anywhere, and then he flopped in front of the television, and I sat on his lap. "You don't really want to walk, do you, Rolo?" he said as he gave me a belly rub. The phone rang and it was the smiley lady ringing to say she was going to stay overnight with the floppy-haired boy's big brother, the one with the rabbit, who lives in London. I had a feeling that my plan might just work. The floppy-haired boy gave me my tea, took me out on my lead for 10 minutes and then shut me in the kitchen saying he was going to a friend's house to play on his Xbox. I waited to hear the click of the front door and off I went as fast as I could through the trapdoor and back to the Athelstan tree. It was quite empty in the cupboard under the sink and I suddenly remembered I'd borrowed the bucket. That's a different story. As I approached the oak tree, I could hear Athelstan and Knave laughing and sharing stories. I must admit, I felt a bit jealous. I heard Athelstan say that Corgi was Welsh for little dog and that they'd been brought to Wales by Flemish weavers to herd livestock. This one didn't look as if he could herd anything, I thought, except possibly a cream tea. Ah, there you are, little pup. Just getting to know young Knave here a little better. What an interesting chap. Ready for your adventure? Look after him, won't you? We both nodded. I thought the corgi looked well rested and not quite so out of breath. As I predicted, the time tunnel was going to be a challenge. Yulia produced another orb from somewhere, but getting the corgi to drop was proving rather difficult. She wrestled it off him for the third time, shoved him towards the entrance and threw the orb down through the hole to open the time tunnel. I followed and then realised I couldn't get past him, so had to allow him to go first. Yulia was giggling as she held her lantern high. She crawled through his legs so she could light the way ahead. A couple of times the tunnel was a bit tight, and it was just as well I was at the rear. Yulia put her lantern down on the ground and squeezed back under the corgi's legs to aid with the pushing. I put my shoulder in and heaved with all my might. I'm just going to show you a picture of this. Chantal's drawing of the corgi being shoved through the time tunnel. 3 times we had to go through this pantomime. I made a mental note not to allow Knave to eat anything on our adventure, or we'd never get him back to the 21st century. Whereabouts do you sleep in the palace? I asked, trying to strike up a conversation. We have our own room with wicker baskets, and a daily menu is posted on the wall for our meals. What day is it today? Asked Knave. Tuesday, said Julia. Oh well, I'm missing chuck steak today then. Maybe Myrtle will save me some. It'll be rabbit tomorrow and poached chicken the day after, usually served with cabbage and rice. We have buttered scones for our tea, served by footmen in royal livery, the corgi sighed. I had to admit this all sounded rather delicious. I rather fancied being a royal dog for at least a day, and I'm just going to show you another picture of a footman with a silver salver and the corgi looking forward to his dinner. I wondered if Her Majesty would notice a Jack Russell in the pack. During our journey, Yulia gave us a bit of background about the man who tried to steal the crown jewels. Thomas Blood was an Irishman. He came to England to fight for King Charles I during the English Civil War, but when he saw the Royalists were losing, he switched sides and supported the Roundheads under Oliver Cromwell. In 1660, when Charles II was restored to the throne, Blood fled to Ireland with his family. He plotted further mischief with other exiled Cromwellians, and after a botched kidnapping in Ireland, he returned to England and set up as a doctor under an assumed name. There he hatched a plot to steal the crown jewels. He knew they were kept in the basement of the Tower of London, behind a metal grille. Disguised as a clergyman, Parson Blood befriended the keeper of the jewels, a man named Talbot Edwards, who lived in the tower above the basement with his family. After a visit to see the crown jewels with her husband, Mrs. Blood feigned an illness and was taken to Edward's apartment to recover. By way of thanks, Parson Blood sent a gift the following day, thus inveigling his way into Talbot Edward's trust and friendship. Athelstan is sending you to witness a meeting between Charles II and Thomas Blood after his failed attempt to steal the crown jewels. Knave was a bit disappointed. He wanted to witness the failed theft, but Athelstan probably thought Corgi would be a bit of a liability and had wisely decided to send us to a point in time after the event. Knave started barking for no apparent reason, and Yulia waved us off with a glance of sympathy to me. He really would have to control all that barking. He was doing my furry little head in. We were inside the Tower of London, and it was 1671, not a year that I'd ever visited before. This was a private audience room, and the first thing I noticed was a man sporting a long black curly wig and fine clothes and an air of importance, seated behind a desk. Opposite him stood a man dressed not so richly but not shabbily either, with his hands bound behind his back. His head was held high, and his demeanour was not the penitent stance you might expect of a captive, especially of a man caught in the act of stealing the crown jewels. There were two other aristocratic gentlemen seated in the room, both wearing long curly wigs. Must be awfully hot under all that hair, I thought. Two guards stood at ease. Luckily no one spotted us. I was praying Knave would have the sense to keep quiet. My eye was drawn down to the fine carpet, and then I detected movement under the table. There sprawled 3 King Charles spaniels, all vying for position, lying across the most important gentleman's feet. Knave had seen them too. He looked most indignant, and I warned him with a look not to start barking at them. I'm descended from the first royal dog, and she was a corgi named Susan. What are these spaniels doing here at the feet of the monarch? The corgi whispered unhappily. So this was King Charles, was it? I had to point out in hushed tones that we were about 350 years prior to the first corgi at Buckingham Palace, so technically these were the royal dogs. Really, this dog seemed to have very little brain for all his royal standing. The king stood up. So, blood, my guards tell me that you will only confess your crime to the sovereign. Is that right, you scoundrel? What's to stop me executing you right here, now, in the tower for your impertinence? He boomed at the prisoner. The man looked King Charles straight in the eye, drew himself up to full height, and answered in a lilting Irish brogue without any hint of subservience, I think you have been swindled, sire, for these crown jewels you believe to be worth £100,000 are only worth 6,000 maximum. His eyes twinkled as he spoke. I cringed inwardly, thinking it was never a good idea to challenge your king, but to my surprise King Charles banged down his fist on the table and roared with laughter. The better-looking man of the trio stepped forward. Rupert, what shall we do with him? The king said, turning to him. The man called Rupert addressed the captive. Tell me, you rogue, why were you trying to stuff the orb down your breeches? Orb? This confused me. Did the thief also have the means to time travel then? I was trying to have them valued, sire. Enough, bellowed the third nobleman, who it transpired was the Duke of York. My men tell me that you and your brother-in-law and 2 accomplices gained the trust of our man Edwards and took advantage of that trust when you followed him to the cellar, watched him remove the grill and then stabbed him with your sword, beat him with a mallet, knocking the poor man unconscious. Then you removed the mace, sceptre and orb and made off with them. Luckily my men restrained you at the iron gate. What do you have to say for yourself? Said the king, and the twinkle in his eyes almost matched that of the restrained man. Well, no harm was done and you have them back. I was only trying to prove how easy it was to steal them, said the audacious felon. Prince Rupert exploded. What do you mean, no harm done? Apparently your brother-in-law tried to saw through the sceptre because it wouldn't fit in the bag. You had the orb down your breeches, and where was the crown? Flattened with a mallet. Enough, roared King Charles as the monarch rose to his feet. The 3 noblemen had a whispered discussion in the corner of the room. The king stood in front of Thomas Blood and addressed him directly. What if I should give you your life? Blood replied humbly, I would endeavour to deserve it, sire. Good answer, man. I was once advised to keep my friends close and my enemies closer, and with this in mind I'm going to let you off and grant you a pension. I will expect to see you at court occasionally where I can keep my eye on you. You are banned, however, from coming within 10 yards of the crown jewels, for I don't trust you 1 jot. Prince Rupert and the Duke of York couldn't believe their ears, and yet they knew their sovereign had a liking for this Irishman who was not afraid to speak out. The man had also highlighted the need for greater security of the crown jewels. Oblivious to the drama, the spaniels continued to sleep at the king's feet, not noticing our presence. The captive's hands were untied by the guards, and the men were making jokes about the luck of the Irish. Knave looked like he was about to say something. I dragged him outside, and then the complaining started. I wanted to be a hero and catch the thief with the crown on his head. We missed the good bit. I'm hungry. What is there to eat? I ushered him back to the time tunnel before his yapping led to our discovery. Yulia rolled her eyes at me because Knave was still complaining all the way back to the forest. Athelstan finished the story. Talbot Edwards, the keeper of the jewels, made a full recovery and kept his job. He was also rewarded with a pension and often retold the story to visitors of the tower, embellishing his role, no doubt. Security around the jewels was greatly tightened, Athelstan added. It's just as well Gwyn wasn't with you on this adventure, as dragons will go to great lengths to acquire jewels, although I doubt he's discovered the lure of them just yet. Knave, you'd better get back to the palace pretty sharpish, as I'm sure your friend Myrtle will be struggling to hide your disappearance, I said. But I haven't had my supper, wailed the tubby corgi. No time for that now. Rolo will see you to the Chilvester passage. I presume you can find your way home from there, Athelstan spoke firmly. The headlines of the Evening Standard the following day told of a corgi from the palace found wandering about in Trafalgar Square. The Queen was greatly relieved to have her boy back and said she didn't know what he'd been up to and that he didn't seem to have come to any harm, but that he was very hungry indeed. So that's the end of the chapter. Rolo's already asleep on the carpet, and I'll be back again on Monday with another story from the Secret Adventures of Rolo at this slightly later time of 3:30, and I hope you all have a lovely weekend until then. Goodbye.